The sound of gunfire echoed through the dusty streets of Redemption Creek as Rose Norwood ducked behind an overturned wagon, her heart pounding wildly against her ribs. Her trembling hands instinctively moved to protect the small, precious swell of her belly 5 months along, and already changing her life in ways she never imagined. It was 1875 in the Arizona Territory, and a pregnant widow without protection was considered easy prey for those with ill intentions. Rose had been minding the small apothecary shop she'd inherited from her late husband when they came for her 3 men with official-looking papers and cold eyes that betrayed their true purpose. They claimed to represent the Territorial Orphan and Widow Assistance Program, but Rose knew better. She'd heard the whispers about young widows being taken to work as indentured servants in wealthy households back east, their babies sold off to childless couples willing to pay handsomely for the privilege of parenthood. When they'd grabbed her arm, she'd fled, running blindly through the town she'd called home for barely a year, praying anyone would help her. The gunfire stopped as abruptly as it had started. Rose held her breath, straining to hear over the blood rushing in her ears. Dust swirled in the hot afternoon air, coating her throat and making her eyes water. "Madam," a deep voice called out, "you can come out now. They've retreated." Rose peered cautiously around the edge of the wagon. Standing in the middle of the street was the tallest man she'd ever seen, a Winchester rifle held casually in his weathered hands. His face was partially obscured by the shadow cast by his wide-brimmed hat, but she could make out a strong jaw darkened with stubble and eyes that seemed to pierce right through her. "Are you hurt?" he asked, taking a step toward her. Rose shook her head, then winced as a pain shot through her side. The exertion of running had taken its toll. In an instant, the man was beside her, helping her to her feet with a gentleness that belied his imposing figure. "Name's Brock Ryder," he said. "And I reckon those men will be back with reinforcements before nightfall." "I'm Rose," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Rose Norwood. They want to take me away because of the baby." Brock's expression hardened as his gaze dropped to her swollen midsection. "Well, they'll have to go through me first," he said, his voice like steel wrapped in velvet. And in that moment, despite the danger surrounding them, Rose felt something she hadn't experienced since her husband's death 6 months prior, a flicker of hope. "We need to get you somewhere safe," Brock said, scanning the street. "My ranch is about 3 hours' ride from here. Can you manage that?" Rose nodded, though uncertainty must have shown on her face because Brock's expression softened. "I know it's a lot to ask, trusting a stranger," he said. "But those men work for Judge Harmon. He's got half the territory in his pocket, including the sheriff in these parts." Rose had heard rumors about the judge, whispers of corruption and cruelty masked behind a veneer of respectability. "Why would you help me?" she asked, needing to know before she placed her life and her child's in this man's hands. Brock's eyes darkened with what looked like old pain. "Let's just say I've seen what happens to women in your situation who get taken by Harmon's men. My sister was one of them." He offered no more explanation, and Rose didn't press for it. "My things," she started to say. "We'll have to leave them. Is there anything you absolutely can't do without?" Rose thought of the small leather-bound journal containing the last letter her husband had written her, tucked beneath the counter in her shop. Just one thing. It would take only a moment to retrieve. Brock hesitated, then nodded. "I'll go with you. Stay close." They moved through the back alleys of Redemption Creek, avoiding the main streets where Harmon's men might be watching. The apothecary shop was mercifully empty when they slipped through the back door. Rose hurried behind the counter and retrieved the journal, along with a small pouch of medicinal herbs she knew would be useful. She hesitated, then grabbed a framed daguerreotype of her husband, Thomas, taken just weeks before the mining accident that claimed his life. Brock watched the door, his rifle ready. "We need to hurry," he urged softly. As they were about to leave, the sound of horses approaching made them freeze. Through the shop's front window, Rose could see 4 men dismounting the 3 from earlier, and a 4th who carried himself with the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "That's Judge Harmon himself," Brock whispered, pulling Rose toward the back door. "We'll have to be quick and quiet." They slipped out just as the men entered the front of the shop. Rose could hear Harmon's booming voice demanding to know her whereabouts. Brock led her to where his horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion, was tethered behind the livery. "This is Thunder," he said, helping her mount before swinging up behind her. "He's the fastest horse in the territory. Hold on tight." Rose clutched the saddle horn as Brock urged Thunder into a gallop, racing out of town just as shouts rose behind them. She glanced back to see Harmon and his men running for their horses, their faces twisted with rage. "They're coming after us," she said, fear squeezing her chest. "Thunder can outrun them," Brock said confidently, his arm secure around her waist as they rode. "And I know these lands better than anyone. We'll lose them in the canyons." True to his word, Brock guided Thunder through a maze of narrow gullies and dried creek beds, doubling back and taking routes that would confuse their pursuers. By the time they emerged onto the open prairie, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "We lost them," Brock confirmed after scanning the horizon. "But we still need to keep moving." "Can you hold on a bit longer?" Rose nodded, though exhaustion was setting in. The baby seemed to sense her distress, kicking insistently against her ribs. She placed a protective hand over her belly, murmuring soft words of reassurance. Brock noticed the gesture. "How far along are you?" "5 months," Rose replied. "The doctor in town says everything looks healthy." "That's good," he said. After a moment of silence, he asked, "Your husband?" "Mining accident," Rose said, the familiar ache of loss washing over her. 6 months ago. We'd only been in Redemption Creek for a few months. He'd taken work in the silver mines while I set up the apothecary." She didn't add that Thomas had died, never knowing he was going to be a father. She discovered her pregnancy 2 weeks after burying him. "I'm sorry," Brock said, and there was genuine compassion in his voice. "That's a heavy burden for anyone to bear, let alone a woman alone." Rose finished for him, a hint of defiance creeping into her tone. "I was managing just fine until those men came." Brock chuckled, the sound warm in the cooling evening air. "I don't doubt it, Mrs. Norwood. You strike me as the capable sort." As they rode, the landscape began to change, the flat prairie giving way to gentle rolling hills dotted with juniper and pine. In the distance, Rose could make out the dark shape of mountains against the darkening sky. "My ranch is in that valley," Brock said, pointing. "We'll be there soon." True to his word, within the hour they crested a hill to reveal a sprawling ranch nestled in a verdant valley. A main house constructed of sturdy logs stood proudly amid several outbuildings. A corral contained several horses, and in the distance, Rose could make out the dark shapes of cattle grazing peacefully. "Welcome to the Double R," Brock said as they approached. "It's not much, but it's home." As they rode into the yard, the front door of the house opened, and an older woman with silver-streaked dark hair emerged, a shotgun held confidently in her hands. "Who's with you, Brock?" she called, her voice carrying clearly in the evening air. "A friend who needs our help, and a leaner," Brock replied. "Put the shotgun down before you scare her half to death." Eleanor Ryder lowered the weapon but kept a wary eye on Rose as Brock helped her dismount. Rose's legs nearly buckled beneath her after the long ride, but Brock's steadying hand on her elbow kept her upright. "This is Mrs. Rose Norwood," he explained to his aunt. "Harmon's men were trying to take her. She's expecting." Alina's expression softened immediately, her keen eyes taking in Rose's condition. "Well, don't just stand there in the yard," she said briskly. "Bring her inside. The poor thing looks dead on her feet." The interior of the ranch house was warm and inviting, with well-worn furniture and colorful quilts that spoke of a home that was lived in and loved. Alina ushered Rose to a comfortable chair near the hearth where a fire was burning low. "I'll make some tea," she announced. "And heat up some stew. You look like you haven't had a proper meal in days." "Thank you," Rose said, feeling overwhelmed by the kindness of these strangers. "I don't know how I can repay you for your help." Brock, who had been watching from the doorway, stepped into the room. "No need for that talk. We help our own out here." "But I'm not your own," Rose pointed out. "Until today, we'd never even met." Something flickered in Brock's eyes, a mix of emotions Rose couldn't quite decipher. "Anyone Harmon's after is a friend of mine," he said simply. "Now, you should eat and rest. Tomorrow we can figure out what to do next." Alina returned with a steaming mug of tea and a bowl of savory stew that made Rose's stomach growl appreciatively. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until the aroma hit her nostrils. As Rose ate, Alina and Brock conferred quietly in the kitchen. Though she couldn't make out their words, the occasional glance in her direction told Rose she was the subject of their discussion. She wasn't surprised she had brought danger to their doorstep after all. After finishing her meal, exhaustion hit Rose like a physical force. Alina seemed to notice because she immediately showed Rose to a small but comfortable bedroom. "This was my daughter's room," Alina explained, turning down the covers on the bed. "She's married and living in Santa Fe now, but I keep it ready for when she visits." "It's lovely," Rose said, genuinely appreciative. "Thank you for your kindness." Alina patted her hand. "Get some rest, dear. You're safe here." Left alone, Rose changed into a nightgown Alina had provided and slipped beneath the covers. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her as her mind raced with thoughts of what tomorrow might bring. Judge Harmon wasn't a man who gave up easily from what she'd heard. And now she had potentially put Brock and Alina in danger as well. Her hand moved to her belly, feeling the reassuring movement of her child within. "We'll be okay," she whispered, though she wasn't entirely convinced. "Somehow we'll be okay." Eventually, the rhythmic sound of cicadas and the distant lowing of cattle lulled her into a fitful sleep. Rose awoke to sunlight streaming through the curtains, and the smell of coffee and bacon wafting through the house. For a moment, disoriented, she thought she was back in the small apartment above her apothecary shop in Redemption Creek. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back, and she sat up with a gasp. A knock at the door drew her attention. "Mrs. Norwood, are you awake?" Brock's deep voice called softly. "Yes," Rose replied, hastily pulling the covers up though she was fully clothed in the borrowed nightgown. "Just a moment, please." "No rush," he said. "Aunt Alina has breakfast ready whenever you are. There's a dress laid out on the chair that might fit you, belonged to my cousin before she married." Rose glanced at the chair and saw a simple blue calico dress. "Thank you," she called back. "I'll be out shortly." After washing up in the basin provided, Rose dressed in the borrowed clothes, which fit reasonably well despite her expanding waistline. She emerged from the bedroom to find Brock and Alina seated at the kitchen table, their conversation halting abruptly as she appeared. "Good morning," Alina said warmly. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I expected," Rose admitted, taking the seat Brock pulled out for her. "Thank you again for your hospitality." Alina waved away her thanks, placing a plate heaped with eggs, bacon, and biscuits before her. Eat up. A woman in your condition needs her strength." As they ate, Brock explained what he had learned from one of his ranch hands who had ridden into town that morning. "Harmon's put out a notice claiming you're mentally unfit to care for yourself or your coming child," he said grimly. "He's offering a reward for information leading to your safe return to proper authorities." Rose's fork clattered against her plate. "That's absurd. I'm perfectly sound of mind." "Of course you are," Eleanor soothed, "but Harmon controls the territorial judge and the asylum. He's done this before, declared women incompetent to seize their property or, in your case, to separate you from your child." "But why would he want my baby?" Rose asked, bewildered. "I don't understand." Brock and Eleanor exchanged glances. "There's a market," Brock said carefully, "for infants. Wealthy couples back east who can't have children of their own will pay handsomely for a newborn with no questions asked, especially if the baby is fair-skinned and healthy." Horror washed over Rose as the implications sank in. "They're selling babies," she whispered, "and my child would be—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "Yes," Brock confirmed, his expression grim, "and they use the mothers as servants or worse until they give birth. After that—" He trailed off, but Rose understood what remained unsaid. "Your sister," she said softly, remembering what he had told her the day before. "Is that what happened to her?" Pain flashed across Brock's face. "Rebecca was widowed at 19. Her husband left her a small ranch near Tucson. Harmon wanted the land for water rights. When she refused to sell, his men came in the night. Claimed she was unstable with grief. By the time I tracked her down 6 months later, she'd already given birth. They told her the baby died, but I later learned it had been sold to a banker and his wife in Boston." "What happened to Rebecca?" Rose asked, though she feared she knew the answer. "She took her own life," Brock said, his voice hollow. "I found her 3 days after they told her about the baby. The kitchen fell silent except for the ticking of the clock on the wall." Rose felt tears welling in her eyes for Rebecca, for the child who would never know its true mother, and for her own precarious situation. "I won't let that happen to you," Brock said, his voice suddenly fierce. "I promise you that, Rose." The use of her given name startled her, but she didn't correct him. Somehow, in the space of a day, formalities seemed unnecessary between them. "What can we do?" she asked, her hand protectively covering her belly. "Harmon has the law on his side, false though his claims may be." "We need to get you somewhere beyond his reach," Eleanor said pragmatically. "The New Mexico territory, perhaps, or even California." "But that would mean leaving everything behind," Rose protested. "My shop, my home." "Your life is worth more than property," Brock pointed out. "And your child's freedom is priceless." Rose knew he was right, but the thought of starting over yet again in a strange place with no connections or resources was daunting. "I need time to think," she said. "Of course," Eleanor agreed, "but not too much time. Harmon won't give up easily, especially now that you've embarrassed him by escaping." After breakfast, Brock offered to show Rose around the ranch to help clear her head. The day was pleasantly warm, with a gentle breeze rustling through the pine trees that surrounded the property. "How long have you lived here?" Rose asked as they walked toward the corral where several horses were grazing. "All my life," Brock replied. "My father built this place from nothing. Started with 10 acres and a dream, ended up with one of the largest cattle operations in the territory." "And your parents?" Rose ventured, noticing he spoke of them in the past tense. "Gone now. Pa 5 years ago, Ma just last winter." A shadow crossed his face. "Aunt Eleanor moved in after Ma passed. She says it's to keep house for me, but I think she was just tired of living alone after Uncle Fred died." "It's a beautiful place," Rose said sincerely. "You've clearly worked hard to maintain it." Brock's expression brightened with pride. We run about 2,000 head of cattle, and I've been breeding horses on the side. Thunder's line is becoming known for speed and endurance." As if hearing his name, the chestnut stallion raised his head from where he was grazing and nickered softly. Brock chuckled and led Rose to the fence where Thunder approached, his ears perked forward with interest. "He likes you," Brock said as the horse gently nuzzled Rose's outstretched hand. "He's magnificent," Rose replied, stroking the stallion's velvety nose. "I've never seen such a beautiful horse." "He saved our lives yesterday," Brock reminded her. "Outran Harmon's men and carried double without complaint." They continued their tour, with Brock pointing out the various buildings and explaining the workings of the ranch. Rose found herself genuinely interested, asking questions about the cattle operation and the horse breeding program. As they approached a small apple orchard near the main house, Rose noticed a wooden structure nestled among the trees. "What's that?" she asked curiously. Brock looked slightly embarrassed. "That's my project," he admitted. "I'm building a proper schoolhouse. There are several families working on the ranch and the children have to ride too far to reach the town school, I thought." He trailed off, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. "You're building them a school," Rose finished, touched by his thoughtfulness. "That's wonderful, Brock." "Well, education matters," he said simply. "My ma was a teacher before she married Pa. She made sure Rebecca and I knew our letters and numbers and history." Not everyone around here had that advantage. Rose thought about the small collection of books she'd kept in her apothecary shop, medical texts mostly, but also some novels and poetry volumes. She'd always found solace in reading, especially after Thomas died. "Would you like to see inside?" Brock asked, gesturing to the schoolhouse. "I'd love to," Rose replied, genuinely curious. The interior of the small building was nearly complete, with rows of simple benches and desks facing a larger desk at the front of the room. A blackboard hung on one wall and bookshelves, still empty, lined another. "It's almost ready," Brock said, running a hand along one of the desks. "Just need to find a teacher willing to come out this far from town." An idea began to form in Rose's mind, but she hesitated to voice it. It seemed presumptuous given her situation. "What is it?" Brock asked, clearly noting her thoughtful expression. "Nothing," Rose said quickly. It's a fine schoolhouse. The children will love it." Brock looked as though he might press further, but a shout from outside interrupted them. "Mr. Ryder, Ryder's coming." The relaxed demeanor Brock had maintained throughout their tour vanished instantly, replaced by alert tension. "Stay here," he instructed Rose, moving swiftly to the door of the schoolhouse. Rose followed despite his directive, unwilling to be left behind when danger might be approaching. From the edge of the orchard, they could see 3 riders approaching the main house where Alina stood on the porch, shotgun once again in hand. "It's just Samuel and the boys," Brock said, his posture relaxing slightly as he recognized his ranch hands. "But they're riding hard. Something's wrong." They hurried back to the house, arriving just as the 3 men dismounted from lathered horses. The lead rider, a weathered man in his 50s with a salt and pepper beard, approached Brock with urgency. "Harmon's deputized a posse," he reported without preamble. "They're claiming they're searching for an abducted woman. They've been to the Morrison place and the Hendersons. They're working their way through all the ranches in the area." Rose felt her heart sink. Harmon was turning the entire community against her with his lies. "How many?" Brock asked, his voice calm despite the gravity of the news. 15, maybe 20 men, Samuel replied. "Armed and looking mean. They've got a doctor with them too, says he'll examine the woman when they find her to prove she's not right in the head." Brock's jaw tightened. "Doctor?" "Winters," he said grimly. He's Harmon's puppet, declares anyone the judge wants locked away as insane. They'll be here by nightfall at the rate they're going, Samuel continued. What do you want us to do, boss? Brock turned to Rose, his expression grave. It's your decision, he said. We can try to hide you here, but if they search the property thoroughly. We could run, Rose suggested, though the thought of Brock abandoning his ranch on her behalf made her stomach churn with guilt. They'd just hunt us down, Brock said, shaking his head. And I won't leave Aunt Alina and the others unprotected. Then what can we do? Rose asked, desperation creeping into her voice. It was Alina who spoke up, her eyes bright with determination. We fight them with their own weapons, she declared. The law. All eyes turned to her as she explained. Harmon's claiming Rose is mentally unfit and needs a guardian, yes. Well, what if she already has one? A husband has legal rights that even Harmon can't easily override. Rose blinked in confusion. But I'm a widow, she pointed out. Not if you remarried, Alina said meaningfully, her gaze shifting to her nephew. Understanding dawned on Rose, sending heat rushing to her cheeks. You're suggesting? A marriage of convenience, Alina confirmed. Just on paper, mind you, to keep you and your child safe from Harmon. Brock looked as stunned as Rose felt. And Alina, that's practical, Alina finished firmly. And temporary, if that's what you both want after the danger has passed. But it would give Rose legal protection she doesn't have now. Rose's mind whirled with the implications. Marriage to a man she'd known for barely a day, it seemed absurd. And yet, what choice did she have? If Harmon's men took her, her child would be sold to strangers, and she would likely meet a fate similar to Brock's sister. Judge Phillips is still at the Morrison place for their daughter's wedding, Samuel interjected. He could perform a legal ceremony if you rode out now. He's no friend of Harmon's, lost his seat on the territorial court because of him. Brock had been silent, his expression unreadable. Now he turned to Rose, his eyes serious. It would be in name only, he said quietly. You'd have my protection and a home here for as long as you need it. When Harmon is no longer a threat, or if you decide you want to leave, we can have it annulled. Rose felt as though she were standing on the edge of a cliff, with no choice but to jump. Would it work? She asked, looking from Brock to Alina. Would marriage really protect me from Harmon? It wouldn't stop him entirely, Brock admitted, but it would make his task much harder. A husband has rights that supersede almost all other claims. He'd have to prove I was unfit as well, which would be difficult given my standing in the community. Rose took a deep breath, placing a hand on her belly where her child moved restlessly, as if sensing her distress. Then I accept, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. If you're truly willing, Brock. His expression softened. I made you a promise, Rose. I intend to keep it. Within the hour, they were on horseback heading for the Morrison ranch, with Alina and Samuel accompanying them as witnesses. Rose rode thunder with Brock, her borrowed dress hastily exchanged for a better-fitting one from Alina's closet. The Morrison place was alive with the sounds of celebration when they arrived, the wedding festivities still in full swing. Mrs. Morrison, a plump, cheerful woman, was horrified when Alina quietly explained their situation. That monster Harmon, she hissed, leading them toward the house where the judge was enjoying the wedding feast. He tried to claim our water rights last year. Only backed down when my Henry threatened to take the matter to the governor himself. Judge Phillips, a thin man with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, listened gravely to their story, his expression darkening when Harmon's name was mentioned. I've been hearing troubling reports about the judge's activities for years, he said. Unfortunately, without concrete evidence, there's little the governor can do. The marriage is a sound strategy, though. Are you both certain this is what you want? Rose and Brock exchanged glances. Yes, they said in unison. The ceremony was brief and simple, conducted in the Morrisons' parlor with Alina, Samuel, and the Morrison family as witnesses. Rose felt oddly detached as she repeated the vows, as though she were watching someone else pledge to love, honor, and cherish Brock Ryder until death parted them. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Brock hesitated only briefly before placing a chaste kiss on her cheek. His hand was warm and steady as it held hers, and Rose found herself drawing strength from his calm presence. Judge Phillips provided them with a marriage certificate, signed and sealed with all proper authority. "This is legal and binding," he assured them. "If Harmon challenges it, send for me immediately." As they prepared to leave, Mrs. Morrison pressed a small package into Rose's hands. "My wedding gift," she said with a wink. "Every bride deserves something special on her wedding day, even if the circumstances are unusual." Rose thanked her, tucking the package into the saddlebag without opening it. Her mind was still trying to process the fact that she was now, legally, Mrs. Brock Ryder. The sun was setting as they rode back to the ranch, casting long shadows across the valley. Alina and Samuel rode ahead, giving Rose and Brock some privacy, or perhaps simply to avoid the awkwardness that hung between the newly married couple. "I'm sorry it had to be this way," Brock said finally, breaking the silence. "It's not how anyone imagines getting married." Rose managed a small smile. "My first wedding wasn't much different," she admitted. "Thomas and I married by a justice of the peace with only his brother as a witness. We couldn't afford a proper celebration." "You loved him," Brock observed, not a question but a statement. "Yes," Rose said softly. "We had known each other since childhood. When he asked me to come west with him, I didn't hesitate." "And now you're tied to a stranger," Brock said, regret coloring his tone. "I want you to know that I meant what I said. This arrangement is for your protection. I expect nothing from you that you're not willing to give." Rose was touched by his consideration. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "You've already done more for me than I had any right to expect." When they arrived back at the ranch, Samuel rode out immediately to gather the rest of the hands and prepare them for the posse's arrival. Alina bustled about the house, making sure everything was in order to receive visitors, unwelcome though they might be. "You should rest," Brock told Rose as they entered the main house. "I'll wake you when they arrive." Rose shook her head. "No, I need to be present. If they see me hiding, it will only reinforce Harmon's lies about my mental state." Brock looked as though he might argue but nodded instead. "Very well, but stay close to me when they come." They didn't have long to wait. Just as full darkness fell, the sound of approaching horses reached them. Brock positioned Rose in the parlor, seated calmly in a chair near the fire with some mending Alina had provided to keep her hands busy. "Remember," he said quietly, "you're my wife now. Act as though we've been married for months, not hours." Rose nodded, fighting to keep her expression serene despite the fear coiling in her stomach. Brock went to the door as a thunderous knock sounded. Rose could hear the murmur of voices, then Harmon's distinct tones rising in anger. After a moment, footsteps approached the parlor, and Brock entered with 3 men: Judge Harmon, Sheriff Taylor from Redemption Creek, and a thin man with spectacles who Rose assumed must be Dr. Winters. "Mrs. Ryder," Brock said meaningfully, coming to stand beside her chair. "These gentlemen would like to speak with you." Rose looked up, feigning mild surprise. "Of course," she said, setting aside her mending and rising to her feet. "Good evening, gentlemen." Harmon's face was flushed with barely contained rage. "This is preposterous," he spat. "You know very well this is Rose Norwood, the widow we've been searching for." "I'm afraid you're mistaken, Judge," Brock said evenly. "This is my wife, Rose Ryder. We've been married since March." A convenient claim, Harmon sneered. Where's your marriage certificate? Brock nodded to a leaner who retrieved the document from a drawer in the writing desk. Signed by Judge Phillips himself, Brock said, handing the paper to Sheriff Taylor rather than Harmon. Completely legal and binding. The sheriff examined the certificate, his expression troubled. This does appear to be in order, Judge, he said reluctantly. Dated March 15 of this year. Harmon snatched the document from the sheriff's hands. Forged, he declared. This woman was in Redemption Creek just yesterday, running her late husband's apothecary shop. Everyone in town knows her as the widow Norwood. My wife maintained her first husband's business after we married, Brock explained smoothly. We thought it best, given her expertise with medicines and the town's need for an apothecary. I stay here to manage the ranch while she tends the shop during the week. Dr. Winters adjusted his spectacles, peering at Rose with clinical detachment. The woman I was asked to examine was reported to be suffering from delusions and hysteria following her husband's death, he said. Potentially dangerous to herself and her unborn child. As you can see, my wife is perfectly sound of mind, Brock said firmly. And under my protection, both legally and physically. Rose met the doctor's gaze steadily, her hands folded calmly in her lap. I assure you, Doctor, I'm in excellent health, both mentally and physically. Harmon wasn't ready to admit defeat. If you've truly been married since March, how is it no one in Redemption Creek knew of this arrangement? Why does she still use the name Norwood in town? For business purposes only, Rose replied, finding her voice. The apothecary was established under that name, and it seemed simpler to maintain it. But I assure you, Judge Harmon, I am legally Mrs. Ryder now. A leaner stepped forward, her expression stern. Judge Harmon, it's getting late, and my niece is in a delicate condition. Whatever confusion has led you to our door, surely it can be resolved without further distressing her. The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. The marriage certificate seems legitimate, Judge, and if Dr. Winters confirms the woman is of sound mind. The doctor hesitated, glancing between Harmon and Rose. For a moment, Rose feared he would declare her insane regardless of the evidence before him. But something, perhaps a shred of professional integrity, or simply fear of challenging Brock on his own property, made him reconsider. I see no immediate signs of mental disturbance, Dr. Winters admitted reluctantly, though a full examination would be necessary for a definitive diagnosis, which would require my consent as her husband, Brock pointed out, which I do not give. My wife has been under considerable strain with her pregnancy and does not need the additional stress of unfounded accusations. Harmon's face had turned an alarming shade of purple. This isn't over, Ryder, he hissed. That woman disappeared from town with a stranger after assaulting my men. If you're harboring a fugitive, my wife left town with me, her lawful husband, Brock interrupted, his voice dangerously calm. Any men who attempted to detain her were acting unlawfully. Now, I believe my aunt has made it clear that it's time for you to leave. For a tense moment, it seemed Harmon might refuse, but the sound of boots on the porch reminded everyone that Brock's ranch hands were nearby, armed and loyal to their employer. We'll verify this marriage with Judge Phillips, Harmon said, jabbing a finger toward the certificate. And I'll be looking very closely at both your claims. Feel free, Brock replied evenly. Now, gentlemen, I'll show you out. After the unwelcome visitors departed, Rose sank back into her chair, trembling with the aftermath of tension. Do you think they believed us? She asked as Brock returned to the parlor. The sheriff did, Brock said, pouring a small glass of brandy and offering it to her. A sip, he advised when she hesitated. For the nerves. Rose took the glass, allowing just a taste of the fiery liquid to pass her lips. And Harmon. He suspects the truth, Brock admitted, taking a seat across from her. But suspicion isn't proof. The marriage certificate is genuine even if the date isn't. Judge Phillips backdated it deliberately to give our story credibility. Harmon won't give up easily, Alina said, joining them. He's not a man who accepts defeat. No, Brock agreed grimly. But he'll move more cautiously now. Direct confrontation didn't work, so he'll look for other vulnerabilities. The shop in town, Rose realized with a pang. Everything I own is there. I'll send some men tomorrow to collect your belongings, Brock assured her. Is there anyone in town who might speak against our story? Anyone who would definitely know you weren't married in March? Rose considered the question. Dr. Mitchell, perhaps. He's been treating me for the pregnancy since shortly after Thomas died, and Mrs. Wilson at the boarding house, she helped me after the funeral. Brock nodded thoughtfully. We'll need to speak with them, explain the situation. Dr. Mitchell, especially his support could be crucial if Harmon pursues the claim of mental instability. Alina yawned, the events of the long day finally catching up with her. We can sort out the details tomorrow, she said. For now, you both should rest. An awkward silence fell as Alina's words highlighted the question neither Rose nor Brock had addressed: sleeping arrangements. They were legally married now, but it was a marriage in name only, formed out of necessity rather than affection. You can have my room, Brock said, breaking the silence. I'll sleep in the bunkhouse with the hands. I couldn't put you out of your own bed, Rose protested. It's no trouble, he assured her. You need the rest more than I do. Alina cleared her throat meaningfully. If I might make a suggestion, she said, appearances matter. If Harmon has men watching the ranch, and I'd bet my last dollar, they'll find it mighty suspicious if the newly reunited husband and wife sleep in separate buildings. Rose felt heat rise to her cheeks at the implication. Brock's expression remained carefully neutral. Aunt Alina has a point, he conceded, but there's a perfectly practical solution. My room has a small sitting area with a comfortable sofa. I can sleep there while you take the bed. It was a sensible compromise, though Rose still felt guilty about displacing him. If you're sure, she said hesitantly. I am, Brock said firmly. Now it's been a long day, we should all get some rest. As Rose followed Brock to his bedroom, she was acutely aware that in the space of 2 days her life had been completely upended. She had fled her home, married a stranger, and now found herself playing the role of devoted wife to maintain the deception. Brock's room was larger than she expected, simply but comfortably furnished with a large bed, a dresser, a wardrobe, and as he'd mentioned, a small sitting area with a sofa and reading chair near the window. A bookshelf filled with volumes suggested he was a man who enjoyed reading in his spare time. The washroom is through that door, Brock said, gesturing to a door on the far wall. I'll, give you some privacy to prepare for bed. Thank you, Rose said, grateful for his consideration. For everything, Brock. I know this isn't what you expected when you came to my aid yesterday. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. No, he agreed, but I don't regret it. After he left, Rose opened the saddlebag where she'd placed Mrs. Morrison's gift. Inside was a beautiful ivory nightgown, delicately embroidered with tiny flowers around the neckline. A note tucked inside read, "Every bride deserves something pretty. May your unusual beginning lead to true happiness." The thoughtfulness of the gift brought tears to Rose's eyes. She changed into the nightgown, its soft fabric a luxury after the practical cotton she was accustomed to. When she was ready, she called softly for Brock to return. He had removed his boots and outer shirt, leaving him in an undershirt and trousers. He carried a blanket and pillow for the sofa. "I'll be right here if you need anything in the night," he said, careful to keep his eyes averted from her nightgown-clad form. "Sleep well, Rose." As she slipped into the bed that smelled faintly of him, a clean, masculine scent of soap and open air, Rose wondered at the strange turns her life had taken. Just 2 days ago, she had been an independent widow preparing for single motherhood. Now she was a married woman again, bound to a man she barely knew by a certificate and a promise of protection. Despite the uncertainty of her situation, Rose fell asleep almost immediately, exhaustion overcoming anxiety. Her last conscious thought was that of all the men who might have come to her rescue, fate had sent her one who treated her with respect and kindness. Perhaps, in time, this marriage of convenience might become something more. The days that followed settled into an unexpected rhythm. Brock sent men to Redemption Creek to retrieve Rose's belongings from the apothecary shop, returning with her clothes, books, medical supplies, and the few mementos she cherished. Dr. Mitchell, the town physician, proved to be an ally, writing a letter affirming Rose's sound mental state and acknowledging her marriage to Brock as a fact he had been aware of but kept confidential at the couple's request. Rose found herself adapting to life at the Double R more easily than she had anticipated. Alina welcomed her presence in the kitchen and around the house, showing her how the ranch operated and introducing her to the families who lived and worked on the property. Brock continued to sleep on the sofa in his room, maintaining a respectful distance even as they presented the image of a happily married couple to the outside world. If any of the ranch hands found the arrangement unusual, they kept their thoughts to themselves, loyal to their employer and the woman he now called his wife. A week after her arrival at the ranch, Rose was in the kitchen garden with Alina, harvesting herbs for drying, when Brock returned from a trip to the nearest town with news. "Harmon's filed a formal challenge to our marriage," he reported, accepting the glass of lemonade Alina offered. "Claims it's a fraudulent arrangement designed to circumvent his lawful authority." Rose's hand stilled on the rosemary she had been cutting. "Can he do that? He can try," Brock said grimly. "But Judge Phillips has submitted a statement confirming the validity of the ceremony. And I spoke with a lawyer in town. He says our case is strong, especially with Dr. Mitchell's support." "What happens now?" Rose asked, trying to keep the fear from her voice. "There will be a hearing next month in the territorial court," Brock explained. "We'll have to appear and testify to the legitimacy of our marriage." "But it isn't legitimate," Rose pointed out quietly, mindful of potential eavesdroppers even on the ranch. "Not in the way they'll expect." "By law it is," Brock insisted. "We took the same vows as any couple. The only unusual aspect is how quickly we decided to marry," Alina snorted. "Plenty of frontier marriages happen after brief acquaintances," she said. "No one will question that part if you present a united front. And if they ask about our courtship," Rose pressed. "Our life together before the wedding. We'll need to create a believable history," Brock admitted. "One with enough details to satisfy curiosity but vague enough that we won't be caught in contradictions." That evening, after dinner, Brock spread a sheet of paper on the kitchen table. "Let's establish our story," he said as Alina retired to her room, leaving the newlyweds to their planning. "We should keep it as close to the truth as possible," Rose suggested. "That will make it easier to remember and more convincing when we tell it." Brock nodded in agreement. "We met last fall," he proposed. "I came to the apothecary for medicine for what? A burn," Rose decided after a moment's thought. "You were treating an injured horse and got burned by the hot iron. I dressed the wound and gave you a salve." "Good," Brock said, making notes. "And I returned a few days later to thank you, perhaps brought you something as a gift." Wildflowers, Rose suggested with a small smile. I always loved when Thomas brought me wildflowers. A shadow passed over Brock's face at the mention of her late husband, but he nodded and added it to the notes. We became friends first, he continued. I would stop by the shop whenever I was in town. And after Thomas died, Rose said softly, you were a support to me in my grief. Practical help at first, then companionship. We married quickly because Brock hesitated, looking at Rose's growing belly. Because we realized we had feelings for each other, Rose finished for him. And because a pregnant widow faces certain challenges in a small town. Exactly, Brock said, his expression warming with approval. A practical decision backed by genuine affection. And the unusual living arrangement me in town, you at the ranch, Rose prompted. The apothecary serves an important function in Redemption Creek, Brock reasoned. We agreed you would continue operating it until closer to the baby's arrival. I would visit when I could, and you would come to the ranch on Sundays and holidays. As they continued constructing their fictional history, Rose found herself imagining how it might have been if their story were true, if they had met under normal circumstances, become friends, perhaps even fallen in love. Brock was undeniably handsome, with his tall frame, strong features, and eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. More importantly, he was kind, honorable, and intelligent, the sort of man Rose might have chosen given time and different circumstances. Rose. Brock's voice broke into her thoughts. You seem far away. She blinked, realizing she had been staring at him while her mind wandered. Just thinking about how convincing we need to be, she said quickly. People expect certain signs from newlyweds. Brock's expression grew serious. We'll need to appear comfortable with each other, he agreed. Small gestures of affection would be expected. Yes, Rose said, heat rising to her cheeks. Nothing inappropriate, of course, but hand-holding, Brock suggested. Perhaps the occasional embrace. Would that be acceptable to you? Rose nodded, grateful for his consideration of her feelings. Yes, that would be fine. And you should call me dear or darling when others are present. Terms of endearment would be natural between husband and wife. Of course, darling, Brock said, testing the word with a slight smile. Then more seriously, I won't do anything that makes you uncomfortable, Rose. Just tell me if I overstep. I know, she said softly. I trust you, Brock. The simple statement seemed to affect him deeply. His eyes held hers for a long moment before he looked away, clearing his throat. It's getting late, he said. We should get some rest. As they prepared for bed that night, Rose in the bedroom, Brock on his sofa, she found herself thinking about trust. In just over a week, this man had become her protector, her ally, and now, in the eyes of the law, her husband. She trusted him with her safety and that of her unborn child. But could she trust him with her heart, which was already beginning to respond to his quiet strength and kindness? The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. Rose was not yet 6 months a widow. Thomas deserved to be mourned properly. And yet, life in the frontier was harsh and often brief. People remarried quickly out of necessity and practicality. Was it so wrong that she found comfort in Brock's presence? These thoughts followed her into sleep, where her dreams mixed memory and possibility in confusing ways. Sometimes, Thomas smiled at her from across their small apartment above the apothecary. Other times it was Brock who waited for her, arms outstretched in welcome. Morning brought clarity and purpose. After breakfast, Rose surprised Brock by asking to see the schoolhouse again. I've been thinking, she said as they walked through the orchard, about what you said regarding finding a teacher for the children. Yes, Brock prompted when she hesitated. Before I married Thomas, I taught school in Ohio for 2 years, Rose explained. It wasn't my life's calling. I always had more interest in medicine and healing, but I enjoyed it. Understanding dawned in Brock's eyes. "You're offering to teach," he said, a hint of pleased surprise in his voice. Rose nodded. "It would give me something meaningful to do here at the ranch, and after the baby comes." She placed a hand on her belly. "Well, it would be a way to contribute to the community that's sheltering us." "Us," Brock repeated, a small smile playing at his lips. "You're beginning to think of this place as home." The observation startled Rose. Was she? It had been only days since her arrival, yet the double R already felt more like home than the lonely rooms above the apothecary ever had after Thomas's death. "Perhaps I am," she admitted. "Is that wrong of me?" "No," Brock said firmly. "I want you to feel at home here, Rose, for as long as you choose to stay." The caveat hung between them, a reminder that their arrangement was temporary, designed to last only until the threat from Harmon passed, or Rose decided to move on. Yet Rose found herself wondering if either of them truly believed it anymore. "The children would be fortunate to have you as their teacher," Brock continued, opening the door to the schoolhouse. "What supplies would you need to begin?" Rose stepped inside, her mind already cataloging possibilities. "Books, of course. Slates for the younger children, paper and pencils for the older ones. A proper teacher's desk would be nice, though not essential." "Make a list," Brock said. "I'll send to Santa Fe for whatever you need." As Rose walked around the small building, ideas flowing freely now, Brock watched her with an expression that combined pride and something deeper, more personal. When she turned suddenly to share another thought, she caught him looking at her with such warmth that her words died in her throat. "What is it?" she asked instead. Brock shook his head slightly. "Nothing," he said. "I'm just glad to see you excited about something." Before Rose could respond, the sound of a horse approaching at speed drew their attention. They stepped outside to see one of the ranch hands, young Jimmy Peterson, riding hard toward the main house. "Mr. Ryder," the boy called, spotting them by the schoolhouse. He reined his horse to a stop, nearly tumbling from the saddle in his haste. "There's trouble in town." "Sheriff Taylor's been shot." Brock was instantly alert. "Shot? By whom?" "Don't rightly know, sir," Jimmy panted. "But word is Judge Harmon's blaming you and Mrs. Ryder. Says you hired someone to eliminate opposition to your scheme." Rose gasped in shock. "That's absurd." "We've been here at the ranch since the night Harmon came." "Harmon doesn't care about the truth," Brock said grimly. "This gives him the excuse he needs to move against us more aggressively." He turned to Jimmy. "Is the sheriff alive?" "Yes, sir. Doc Mitchell says he'll pull through." "Bullet hit his shoulder." "Thank goodness for that, at least," Rose murmured. "Jimmy, ride back to town," Brock instructed. "Find out everything you can about what happened and who's saying what. Don't let anyone know you're gathering information for me. Just listen and observe." "Yes, sir," the young man said, straightening with pride at the important assignment. "And Jimmy," Brock added, "be careful. If Harmon's willing to fabricate accusations against us, he might not take kindly to perceived spies." After Jimmy rode off, Brock and Rose returned to the main house, where Alina was already organizing the ranch hands into defensive positions, her experience as a rancher's wife evident in her calm efficiency. "I've sent word to Judge Phillips," she informed them as they entered. "If Harmon tries to use this incident to arrest either of you, we'll need legal counsel immediately." "Good thinking," Brock said. "We should prepare for the worst. Harmon won't waste this opportunity." Rose sank into a kitchen chair, one hand protectively covering her belly where the baby kicked vigorously, as if sensing her distress. Who would shoot the sheriff? She wondered aloud. He seemed like a reasonable man when he came here with Harmon. "That might be precisely why," Brock said darkly. If Taylor was beginning to doubt Harmon's claims about you, he could become a liability. "You think Harmon arranged the shooting himself?" Eleanor asked, shocked despite her low opinion of the judge. "I wouldn't put it past him," Brock said. "He has too much at stake to let a reluctant sheriff stand in his way. But to shoot a lawman—" Rose shook her head in disbelief. "That's a hanging offense." "Only if he's caught," Brock pointed out. "And with Taylor temporarily out of commission, Harmon can appoint a deputy more aligned with his interests." The day passed in tense anticipation, with ranch hands positioned as lookouts around the property. By nightfall, Jimmy had returned with troubling news. Harmon had indeed named a new deputy, his own nephew, Vernon Harmon, a man known for his quick temper and quicker trigger finger. "He's been asking questions all over town about you and Mrs. Ryder," Jimmy reported as they gathered in the kitchen. "Specifically about when folks last saw you together before the day you left town. He's trying to disprove our marriage," Brock concluded. "Find witnesses who'll testify they never saw us behaving like husband and wife." "That's not all," Jimmy continued nervously. "I overheard Vernon talking to some men at the saloon. Said they'd be paying a visit to the Double R tomorrow to interview the suspects about the shooting." Eleanor's expression hardened. "They mean to provoke a confrontation," she said. "Give them an excuse to use force." "We won't give them that satisfaction," Brock said firmly. "When they arrive, we'll be calm, cooperative, and completely innocent, which we are." Rose fought to control her rising panic. "What if they try to separate us? Take me back to town for questioning?" Brock's eyes met hers, his gaze steady and reassuring. "I won't let that happen," he promised. "You're my wife. Where you go, I go." The simple declaration calmed Rose's fears more than any elaborate plan could have. Whatever happened, they would face it together. That night, as Rose prepared for bed, a soft knock sounded at the bedroom door. Brock entered, his expression troubled. "I've been thinking," he said without preamble. "If Harmon's men come tomorrow with the intent to separate us, we'll need to be convincing as a devoted couple." Rose nodded, understanding his concern. "More convincing than hand-holding and terms of endearment." "Yes," Brock agreed. "They'll be watching how we interact, looking for any sign that our marriage is a sham." He hesitated, then continued. "It might be necessary for me to be more demonstrative than I've been thus far." The implication was clear. Rose felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she kept her voice steady. "I understand. We should appear comfortable with each other's touch, like a real husband and wife. Only if you're comfortable with it," Brock emphasized. "I won't add to your distress by forcing unwanted attentions on you, even for appearance's sake." Rose studied him in the lamplight, this man who had risked everything to protect her and her unborn child. His eyes held nothing but concern for her well-being and respect for her boundaries. "I trust you," she said simply. "Do whatever you think necessary to maintain our deception. I won't misinterpret your actions." Relief washed over Brock's features. "Thank you," he said softly. "Try to get some rest. Tomorrow will be challenging." After he returned to his sofa, Rose lay awake for a long time, her mind turning over the implications of their conversation. The thought of Brock's arms around her, his lips against her skin even in pretense, sent a flutter through her that had nothing to do with fear. She placed a hand on her belly, feeling the reassuring movement of her child within. "What an unusual situation we find ourselves in, little one," she whispered. "Your father is gone, yet you might be raised by another man's name, a good man, I think. One who protects those who cannot protect themselves." Morning brought no respite from tension. Everyone at the Double R moved with careful purpose, preparing for the arrival of Harmon's men. Brock stationed his most trusted hands near the house. with instructions to observe but not interfere unless the situation turned dangerous. Around mid-morning, the lookout reported a group of riders approaching 6 men led by Vernon Harmon, all armed and riding with the confidence of those who believed the law was on their side. Brock met Rose in the parlor before going out to greet their unwelcome visitors. "Remember," he said quietly, "we have nothing to hide regarding the sheriff's shooting. We were here together with multiple witnesses." Rose nodded, straightening her dress and pushing a stray curl back into her careful updo. "I'm ready," she said, though her racing heart suggested otherwise. "One more thing," Brock said, his expression softening. "This might be a good time for that demonstration we discussed." Before Rose could respond, he stepped closer and took her hands in his. "May I?" he asked, his voice low. At her nod, Brock leaned down and pressed his lips gently to hers. The kiss was brief but tender, a promise of protection rather than passion. Yet Rose felt something spark between them, a connection that transcended their practical arrangement. When he pulled away, Brock's eyes held a question she couldn't quite interpret. There was no time to analyze it as Alina called from the porch. "They're here." Brock offered his arm, which Rose took, grateful for his steadying presence. Together, they walked onto the porch to face whatever accusations Vernon Harmon might bring. The young deputy sat tall in his saddle, a sheriff's badge pinned prominently to his vest. His resemblance to Judge Harmon was unmistakable, the same heavy brow and thin lips, though the younger man's features were sharper, his expression more openly aggressive. "Brock Ryder," Vernon called without dismounting, "I'm here to question you and the woman calling herself your wife about the attempted murder of Sheriff Taylor." "Deputy Harmon," Brock acknowledged coolly. "My wife and I are happy to answer your questions. Won't you come inside?" "My aunt has coffee brewing." Vernon's eyes narrowed at Brock's calm demeanor. "This isn't a social call, Ryder. I have the authority to arrest you if I find cause." "I'm aware of the law, Deputy," Brock replied evenly. "But as neither my wife nor I have done anything wrong, I see no reason we can't discuss this matter civilly." After a moment's consideration, Vernon dismounted, signaling 2 of his men to join him. The others remained on horseback, positioned strategically around the yard. Inside, Alina served coffee with frigid courtesy while Vernon studied Rose with undisguised suspicion. "Mrs. Ryder," he said, emphasizing the name with skepticism. "When did you last see Sheriff Taylor?" "A week ago," Rose replied truthfully. "When he came to the ranch with your uncle and Dr. Winters? And your whereabouts the day before yesterday, between noon and 3 o'clock? "My wife was here at the ranch," Brock answered. "We were inspecting the new schoolhouse I've built for the children of our workers." Vernon's gaze shifted to Brock. "I asked her, not you." "My husband is correct," Rose said, her voice steadier than she felt. "We spent the afternoon at the schoolhouse, then had dinner with his aunt and several of the ranch hands." "Convenient that you have an alibi for each other," Vernon remarked sourly. "And a dozen other witnesses," Alina pointed out from her position near the doorway. "Every hand on this ranch can testify to their presence here." Vernon ignored her, focusing on Rose again. "You realize harboring a fugitive is a crime, Mrs. Ryder, if that's even your real name." Brock's arm tightened around Rose's waist where they sat together on the sofa. "My wife's identity is not in question, Deputy. Our marriage certificate has been verified by Judge Phillips himself." "Judge Phillips," Vernon sneered, "a man with a well-known grudge against my uncle." "A respected jurist whose integrity is beyond reproach," Brock countered. The interview continued in this vein for nearly an hour, with Vernon attempting to intimidate and confuse Rose with rapid-fire questions about her background, her relationship with Brock, and her actions the day of the shooting. Throughout it all, Brock remained beside her, his steady presence giving her strength. When Vernon began to repeat questions she had already answered, clearly hoping to catch her in a contradiction, Rose finally reached her limit. "Deputy Harmon," she said firmly, "I understand you have a duty to investigate the shooting of Sheriff Taylor, but I've answered all your questions truthfully, multiple times. My husband and I were here at the ranch when the sheriff was shot. We had nothing to do with it." Vernon's face flushed with anger at her direct challenge. "I'll decide when you've answered enough questions, woman," he snapped. "You'll address my wife with respect in our home," Brock said, his voice dangerously quiet, "or this interview is concluded." The tension in the room ratcheted higher as the two men locked eyes in silent confrontation. Finally, Vernon looked away first. "Fine," he muttered. "One last question then. If you're truly married, why was Mrs. Ryder," he emphasized the name skeptically, "living alone above the apothecary shop in town? Seems mighty strange for a newlywed couple." It was the question they had prepared for, yet Rose still felt a flutter of anxiety as she replied. "The apothecary serves an important function in Redemption Creek. After we married, we decided I would continue operating it while my husband managed the ranch. It was a practical arrangement that suited our circumstances." "And with the baby coming," Brock added, his hand moving protectively to rest on Rose's belly, "we recently decided it was time for Rose to settle permanently at the ranch. That's why I went to town to bring her home the day Judge Harmon's men tried to detain her." The intimacy of Brock's gesture seemed to unsettle Vernon more than any of their verbal explanations. His gaze dropped to where Brock's hand rested on Rose's swollen midsection, a visible symbol of their purported union. "Well," he said, rising abruptly, "I've heard enough for now. But this investigation isn't closed. Don't either of you leave the territory." "We have no intention of going anywhere, Deputy," Brock said, also standing. "This is our home." After Vernon and his men departed, Rose sagged against Brock in relief. "Do you think he believed us?" she asked. "It doesn't matter if he did," Brock replied, still holding her close. "What matters is that he couldn't disprove anything we said. Harmon will have to find another approach." Alina bustled in with fresh coffee. "You both handled that well," she said approvingly. "Especially that business with the baby, Brock. Very convincing." Rose felt herself blush at the memory of Brock's hand on her belly, a gesture that had seemed so natural in the moment, but now reminded her of the intimacy they were pretending to share. "Thank you for your support," she said to Alina, eager to change the subject. "I was terrified he would demand to take me to town for further questioning. He knows better than to try separating a man from his wife without cause," Alina said confidently, "especially with witnesses present." Later that evening, as Rose prepared for bed, she found herself replaying moments from the day, the gentle press of Brock's lips against hers before Vernon arrived, the protective way his arm had encircled her waist during questioning, the warm weight of his hand on her belly. Each memory brought a confusing mixture of emotions: gratitude for his protection, admiration for his quick thinking, and something deeper, more personal that she wasn't quite ready to name. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Brock entered, carrying a small package. "This came for you today," he said, handing it to her. "With everything else happening, I forgot to give it to you earlier." Rose unwrapped the package to find a letter from Dr. Mitchell, along with several small bottles of tonic he had been preparing for her pregnancy. "He writes that Harmon's men searched the apothecary thoroughly after we left," she reported as she scanned the letter. "They were convinced I'd left some evidence of our scheme behind." "Did they find anything incriminating?" Brock asked, concern evident in his voice. Rose shook her head. "Nothing to find, But Dr. Mitchell says Sheriff Taylor is recovering well and asking questions about why Harmon is so fixated on me. He thinks Taylor might become an ally once he's back on his feet. That's promising news, Brock said. He hesitated, then added, Rose, about today. The kiss and during the interview when He gestured vaguely toward her midsection. You were playing the part of devoted husband, Rose said quickly, not wanting him to feel uncomfortable. I understood. Yes, Brock agreed, though something in his expression suggested he wanted to say more. Still, I hope I didn't overstep. You didn't, Rose assured him softly. In fact, I'm grateful. You made our story convincing when it mattered most. Brock studied her face for a long moment, as if searching for something. Whatever he saw seemed to satisfy him because he nodded and moved toward the door. Good night, then, he said. Sleep well. After he left, Rose sat on the edge of the bed, her fingers unconsciously touching her lips where Brock had kissed her. It had been a simple gesture, meant only for show, yet it had awakened feelings she thought had died with Thomas, a flutter of attraction, a whisper of possibility. Was it disloyal to feel this way? Thomas had been gone only 6 months, yet already another man occupied her thoughts. But then, Thomas himself had once told her that life on the frontier demanded practicality above sentiment. If something happens to me, he had said with frontier pragmatism, don't waste years in mourning. Find someone good and steady who'll care for you and any children we might have. At the time, Rose had dismissed his words, unable to imagine life without him. Now, with his child growing within her and danger threatening from without, she wondered if perhaps Thomas had understood better than she what survival in this harsh land required. And Brock Ryder was undeniably good and steady, a man who had risked his reputation and safety to protect a woman he barely knew, who treated her with respect and kindness, who seemed genuinely concerned for her well-being beyond the obligations of their arrangement. Was it so wrong to wonder what might develop between them if their marriage of convenience became something more? The following weeks brought an uneasy calm to the Double R. Vernon Harmon made no further visits, though ranch hands returning from town reported that he and Judge Harmon were still asking questions about Rose and Brock, clearly seeking evidence to disprove their marriage. Rose settled into life at the ranch, helping Alina with household tasks, organizing supplies for the schoolhouse, and putting her knowledge of herbs and medicine to use treating minor injuries and ailments among the ranch workers and their families. As her pregnancy advanced, she found comfort in establishing this new routine, in being useful and needed. Brock continued to sleep on the sofa in his room, maintaining the respectful distance he had established from the beginning. Yet Rose noticed subtle changes in their interactions, his hand lingering a moment longer when he helped her down from a wagon, his eyes following her movements when he thought she wasn't looking, the quiet pleasure in his expression when she joined him for an evening walk around the property. One evening, about 3 weeks after Vernon's visit, Rose was sitting on the porch swing, enjoying the cooler air after a warm day, when Brock joined her. He carried 2 glasses of lemonade, offering one to her before taking a seat beside her. The schoolhouse is nearly ready, he said after a comfortable silence. The books you requested arrived from Santa Fe today. That's wonderful, Rose replied, genuinely pleased. I can't wait to begin teaching. The Peterson children especially seem eager to learn. Brock nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. Jimmy told me he wants to be a doctor someday, said you inspired him with your knowledge of medicine. He's a bright boy, Rose said. With proper education, he could do it. They fell silent again, the only sounds the gentle creaking of the swing and the evening chorus of crickets. Finally, Brock spoke, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. Rose, there's something I've been meaning to discuss with you. Something in his tone made Rose's heart beat faster. "Yes. The hearing is in 2 weeks," he reminded her. "We'll need to appear before the territorial court to defend our marriage against Harmon's challenge." "I know," Rose said, her hand instinctively moving to her belly where the baby kicked vigorously. At nearly 7 months along, her condition was impossible to disguise. "I'm nervous about facing Harmon again, but I'm ready." "It's not just Harmon I'm concerned about," Brock admitted. "The judge will want to see evidence that our marriage is genuine, not just the certificate, but signs of real affection between us." Rose nodded, understanding his concern. "We've become more comfortable with each other," she pointed out. "Surely that will be apparent." "Yes, but—" Brock hesitated, then plunged ahead. "Rose, I need to know what you want after this is over. Assuming we convince the court and Harmon's challenge fails, what then?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications. What did she want? The safety of legal protection, certainly. A father for her child, yes, but beyond those practical considerations, "I don't know," she said honestly. "When we made this arrangement, it was meant to be temporary, a solution to an immediate problem. But now—" "Now," Brock prompted gently when she fell silent. Rose turned to face him directly. "Now I find myself wondering if perhaps we rushed into a real solution without recognizing it as such." Brock's expression became very still. "What are you saying, Rose?" "I'm saying that I've come to care for you," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "More than I expected to. More than I thought I could so soon after losing Thomas." For a moment, Brock didn't respond, and Rose feared she had misinterpreted his concern, exposed feelings he didn't reciprocate. Then, slowly, he reached out to take her hand in his. "I've been afraid to tell you," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "how quickly you've become important to me. Not just as someone I promised to protect, but as a woman I deeply admire. I didn't want to pressure you or make you feel that my help came with expectations." Relief and something warmer flooded through Rose. "You've never made me feel that way," she assured him. "You've been nothing but respectful and kind." "Because that's what you deserve," Brock said simply. "What I didn't expect was how natural it would feel to have you here, to see you with Aunt Alina, to imagine a future with you and the baby as part of my life." Rose felt tears welling in her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that her confused feelings were not one-sided. "I've been so afraid," she confessed, "that I was betraying Thomas's memory by caring for you. But he would have wanted me to be happy, to find someone who would protect and provide for his child." "And do you think you could be happy here with me?" Brock asked, his eyes searching hers. "Not just as a convenient solution to Harmon's threats, but as a true wife, a partner." "I think I already am happy with you," Rose said softly. "Happier than I expected to be again." Brock's face transformed with a smile of such genuine joy that Rose's breath caught in her throat. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned closer and brushed his lips against hers. This kiss was different from the brief one they had shared for Vernon's benefit, deeper, more meaningful, a promise rather than a performance. When they finally parted, Rose felt as though something fundamental had shifted between them, a transition from pretense to possibility. "When we go before that judge," Brock said, his voice low and intense, "I want us to tell the truth that our marriage may have begun suddenly, under unusual circumstances, but that we've grown to care for each other deeply. That we want to build a life together, raise this child together." "Yes," Rose agreed, her heart full. "That's what I want too." The night before they were to leave for the territorial court hearing, Rose sat at the small desk in what was now truly their bedroom, writing in the journal that had once contained Thomas's last letter to her. Brock had moved his things back into the room 2 days after their conversation on the porch. though he still slept on the sofa, insisting that Rose needed her rest and comfort in her advancing pregnancy. "What are you writing?" he asked, coming to stand behind her chair. "A letter to our child," Rose replied, not looking up from the page, "explaining how we came together, how unusual circumstances led to something neither of us expected." Brock's hand came to rest on her shoulder, warm and reassuring. "May I read it someday?" he asked. "Of course," Rose said, closing the journal. "It's part of our family history now. Family." The word hung between them, full of promise and commitment. Whatever the court decided tomorrow, Rose knew that she and Brock had already made their own decision to transform their marriage of convenience into one of true partnership and growing affection. The territorial court was housed in an imposing stone building in the capital, a 3-day journey from the Double R. Judge Phillips had arranged accommodations for them and agreed to testify on their behalf, his support proving invaluable as they prepared to face Harmon's challenge. The morning of the hearing dawned clear and cool. Rose dressed carefully in her best maternity gown, a deep blue that Alina had altered to fit her 7-month figure properly. Brock wore a formal suit that transformed him from rugged rancher to distinguished gentleman, though his weathered face and strong hands still spoke of a man accustomed to physical labor. "You look beautiful," he told Rose as he helped her with her shawl. "And you're very handsome," she replied, straightening his tie with hands that trembled slightly from nerves. "Brock, what if the judge rules against us?" "He won't," Brock said with more confidence than he probably felt. "Our case is strong, our witnesses credible. Even if Harmon has managed to find people willing to testify they never saw us together in town, it won't be enough to invalidate our marriage." Rose nodded, trying to absorb his certainty. "And if somehow he does rule against us," Brock's expression turned serious. "Then we leave the territory," he said firmly. "Tonight, if necessary. I have money set aside, connections in California. We'll start over where Harmon can't reach us." The fact that he included himself without hesitation in this contingency plan, willing to abandon his beloved ranch, rather than let Rose face Harmon's schemes alone spoke volumes about his commitment to her and her child. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that," Rose said, her voice steadier now. "The Double R is your home, your inheritance from your parents." "Home is where you are now," Brock said simply, the words all the more powerful for their quiet certainty. The courtroom was packed when they arrived, the case having attracted considerable attention in the territorial capital. Judge Harmon sat at the plaintiff's table, accompanied by Vernon and a slick-looking lawyer from back east. Their side of the courtroom was filled with supporters, businessmen who benefited from Harmon's corrupt dealings, officials he had intimidated or bribed. Rose and Brock took their places at the defense table where Judge Phillips and their attorney, Matthew Wilson, awaited them. The friendly faces of Alina, Samuel, and several other ranch hands filled the seats behind them, a visible reminder that they were not alone in this fight. The territorial judge, a stern-faced man named Hollister, called the court to order. "We are here to determine the validity of the marriage between Brock Ryder and Rose Norwood Ryder," he announced. "Judge Harmon has filed a challenge claiming fraud and deception. We will hear evidence from both sides before rendering judgment." Harmon's attorney presented their case first, calling witnesses from Redemption Creek, who testified they had never seen Rose and Brock behaving as a married couple during the period when they claimed to have been wed. The town gossip, Mrs. Willard, was particularly damaging, insisting that Rose had always presented herself as the widow Norwood, never mentioning a new husband. "And wouldn't a new bride be eager to share such happy news?" the attorney pressed. "Indeed she would, Mrs. Willard agreed with a self-satisfied smile. Unless, of course, there was no marriage to speak of. When it was their turn, Rose and Brock's attorney called Dr. Mitchell to testify first. The kindly doctor spoke of Rose's pregnancy, confirming it was progressing normally, and then addressed the matter of her marriage. Mrs. Ryder asked me to keep her marriage confidential initially, he explained. Out of respect for her late husband's memory and to avoid gossip in a small town where she was still establishing her business. As her physician, I respected her wishes. And did you have reason to believe the marriage was genuine? Their attorney asked. I did, Dr. Mitchell replied firmly. Mr. Ryder consulted me about his wife's condition whenever he was in town, showing appropriate concern for both mother and child. Their affection for each other was evident in their interactions. Judge Phillips testified next, confirming that he had performed the ceremony, and that both parties had entered into it with full understanding and consent. His reputation for integrity made it difficult for Harmon's attorney to discredit his testimony, though he tried by insinuating that Phillips' known animosity toward Harmon had influenced his actions. Finally, it was time for Rose and Brock to testify. Rose went first, her heart pounding as she took the oath and faced the courtroom. Mrs. Ryder, their attorney began, please tell the court how you met your current husband. Rose recounted the story they had crafted together, the burn that brought Brock to her shop, the friendship that developed, his support after Thomas's death, and their decision to marry when they realized their feelings had deepened. She spoke of the practical considerations that led them to maintain separate residences temporarily and their plans to reunite permanently at the ranch as her pregnancy advanced. And why did you continue to use the name Norwood in your business dealings? The attorney asked. The apothecary was established under that name, Rose explained. Changing it would have confused my customers and potentially harmed the business. In my personal life, however, I considered myself Mrs. Ryder. When it was Harmon's attorney's turn to question her, he focused on the lack of witnesses to their courtship and marriage ceremony. Isn't it convenient, he suggested silkily, that no one from Redemption Creek was present at this supposed wedding? That no one can confirm you were actually married when you claim to have been? We chose a private ceremony, Rose replied steadily. Many couples in the territory do the same, especially when, like me, one party is recently widowed. And isn't it also convenient, the attorney pressed, that this alleged marriage occurred just in time to prevent you from being placed under proper supervision due to your mental state? Rose's chin lifted. There is nothing wrong with my mental state, she said firmly. That claim was fabricated by Judge Harmon to gain control over me and my unborn child. A murmur ran through the courtroom at this direct accusation. Judge Hollister banged his gavel for order. Mrs. Ryder, that is a serious allegation, he warned. Yes, Your Honor, it is, Rose agreed. And I make it knowing its seriousness. Judge Harmon has been involved in separating vulnerable women from their children under false pretenses. My late husband's property, modest though it is, provided him with another opportunity. Harmon half rose from his seat, his face purpling with rage, but his attorney placed a restraining hand on his arm. Brock's testimony followed Rose's, corroborating her account of their meeting and developing relationship. He spoke with quiet authority about his decision to marry Rose, his respect for her independence in maintaining the apothecary, and their plans for the future now that she had joined him permanently at the ranch. Mr. Ryder, Judge Hollister asked when both attorneys had finished their questioning, do you love your wife? The directness of the question seemed to surprise everyone in the courtroom, including Brock, but he didn't hesitate in his response. Yes, Your Honor, I do, he said, his gaze finding Rose's across the courtroom. What began as mutual respect has grown into deep affection and commitment. I consider myself fortunate that she agreed to share her life with mine. The simplicity and evident sincerity of his declaration brought tears to Rose's eyes. This was no rehearsed testimony, no continuation of their deception. This was Brock speaking his heart in the most public forum imaginable. After the final arguments from both attorneys, Judge Hollister called for a recess to consider his ruling. Rose and Brock waited in a small antechamber, her hand clasped tightly in his. "You mean what you said?" she asked softly. "About loving me?" Brock's expression was solemn as he looked down at her. "Every word," he assured her. "I know it's happened quickly and perhaps unusually, but yes, Rose, I love you. Whatever the judge decides, that won't change." Rose's heart swelled with emotion. "I love you too," she whispered, the words feeling right and true as they left her lips. "I didn't expect to find love again so soon, but I have. With you." When they returned to the courtroom an hour later, Judge Hollister's expression gave nothing away. He called the court to order and delivered his ruling with judicial precision. "Having heard testimony from all parties and witnesses, I find no compelling evidence to invalidate the marriage between Brock Ryder and Rose Ryder," he declared. While the timing of their union was perhaps expedient given Mrs. Ryder's condition and recent widowhood, there is nothing in territorial law that prohibits such arrangements. Relief washed over Rose in a dizzying wave. Beside her, Brock's hand tightened on hers. "Furthermore," Judge Hollister continued, his gaze shifting to Harmon, "I find the plaintiff's claims regarding Mrs. Ryder's mental fitness to be without foundation and potentially malicious in intent. This court dismisses all such claims and affirms Mrs. Ryder's right to manage her own affairs and property with her husband's support." The judge's gavel fell with finality. "This case is dismissed." The journey back to the Double R was considerably lighter in spirit than the journey to court had been. Rose and Brock traveled in a comfortable wagon rather than on horseback, allowing Rose to rest properly during the long trip. At night, they stayed in small hotels along the way, no longer maintaining the pretense of sleeping separately now that their marriage had been affirmed in both law and heart. "What will happen to Harmon now?" Rose asked as they neared home on the third day. "Will he face consequences for his actions?" Judge Hollister mentioned that he would be referring certain matters to the territorial governor for investigation, Brock replied. "And Sheriff Taylor is back on duty, asking uncomfortable questions about the circumstances of his shooting. Harmon's influence is waning." "Good," Rose said firmly. "I hope no other woman has to endure what Rebecca suffered." Brock's expression sobered at the mention of his sister. "I wish she could have known that someone finally stood against him," he said quietly. "That his schemes were exposed." "She knows," Rose said, placing her hand over his. "Wherever she is now, she knows." The Double R came into view as they crested a familiar hill, the buildings nestled in the valley below looking like the haven they had become. Eleanor and the ranch hands had strung a banner between two posts at the entrance to the main yard. "Welcome home, Mr. and Mrs. Ryder." "Look at that," Brock said with a chuckle. "Aunt Eleanor does love a celebration." "It feels like a homecoming," Rose said, her heart full as she took in the sight. "A real one." "It is," Brock agreed, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "For both of us." The weeks that followed were busy with preparations for the baby's arrival and the opening of the schoolhouse. Rose taught morning lessons to the ranch children, then rested in the afternoons as her pregnancy entered its final month. Brock divided his time between ranch work and building a cradle for the coming child, his large hands surprisingly deft with the delicate woodwork. "It's beautiful," Rose said one evening as she ran her fingers over the smooth pine of the nearly completed cradle. "Did you learn woodworking from your father?" "From my grandfather, actually," Brock replied, setting aside his tools. "He made furniture when the ranch work was slow in winter. Taught me how to select the right wood, how to work with the grain instead of against it." Rose smiled, recognizing the same philosophy in how Brock approached life, working with circumstances rather than fighting them, finding opportunity in challenge. It was one of the many qualities she had come to love about him. "What are you thinking?" Brock asked, noting her thoughtful expression. "That our child is fortunate to have you for a father," Rose said honestly. "Even though you're not related by blood, you'll pass on values and skills that are just as important as any inheritance of features or traits." Brock's expression softened with emotion. "That means more to me than I can say," he admitted. "I've been wondering. Would you mind if the baby carried my name? Not just my surname, which he or she will have anyway, but perhaps as a middle name." The request touched Rose deeply. "I would like that very much," she said. Thomas would have wanted his child to have a father who cared enough to consider such things. "Thank you," Brock said simply. He placed a hand on her rounded belly, something he now did often and naturally. "Not long now. Are you nervous?" "A little," Rose admitted. "Childbirth is never without risk, but Dr. Mitchell has agreed to come stay at the ranch when the time is near and I'm healthy and strong." "You are indeed," Brock agreed, pride evident in his voice. "The strongest woman I know." 2 weeks later, as autumn painted the valley in golds and russets, Rose's labor began. Dr. Mitchell had arrived just the day before, his timing providential as her waters broke shortly after breakfast. Alina transformed the bedroom into a birthing chamber with practiced efficiency, laying out clean linens and heated water while Dr. Mitchell prepared his instruments. Brock paced the hallway outside, refusing to leave the house despite the tradition that men should make themselves scarce during childbirth. "I want to be near her," he insisted when Samuel suggested he might prefer the distraction of ranch work. "In case she needs me." The labor was long but uncomplicated. As evening approached, Dr. Mitchell allowed Brock briefly into the room where Rose rested between contractions. "You're doing wonderfully," the doctor assured her. "Everything is progressing normally." Brock took her hand, his face a mixture of concern and awe. "You're amazing," he told her, pressing a kiss to her damp forehead. "I'm so proud of you." Rose managed a tired smile. "Tell me that again after the hard part," she said, just before another contraction seized her. Shortly after midnight, with a final, exhausting effort, Rose brought their daughter into the world, a robust infant with a shock of dark hair and lungs powerful enough to announce her arrival to the entire ranch. "A beautiful, healthy girl, Dr. Mitchell declared, placing the swaddled infant in Rose's arms after the necessary cleaning and examination. Rose gazed down at her daughter, overwhelmed by love and wonder. When Brock was allowed to return, his expression as he beheld his wife and new daughter was one Rose would remember for the rest of her life, a mixture of relief, joy, and boundless tenderness. "She's perfect," he whispered, gently touching the baby's tiny hand, which immediately curled around his finger with surprising strength. "Absolutely perfect. Rebecca Alina Ryder," Rose said softly, looking up at him. "After your sister and your aunt, if that's all right with you." Tears glistened in Brock's eyes as he nodded, too moved for words. He bent to kiss Rose, then pressed his lips gently to his daughter's forehead. "Welcome to the world, Rebecca," he murmured. "You are so very loved." In the peaceful days that followed Rebecca's birth, as autumn deepened toward winter, the Double R settled into a new rhythm centered around its youngest resident. Alina proved herself a doting great aunt, always willing to rock the baby while Rose rested or taught her shortened school sessions. The ranch hands treated Rebecca like a princess, bringing small handmade gifts and competing for her toothless smiles. And Brock discovered in himself a natural aptitude for fatherhood. He walked the floor with Rebecca when she was fussy, sang her to sleep with cowboy ballads, and spoke to her of ranch matters as though she understood every word. His tenderness with his daughter only deepened Rose's love for him, cementing the bond that had grown between them. 6 months after Rebecca's birth, on a clear spring evening, Brock took Rose for a walk to the schoolhouse, now a thriving center of learning for the ranch children. Little Rebecca was securely bundled in her father's arms, her dark eyes wide with interest at the colorful sunset painting the sky. "I have something to show you," Brock said mysteriously, leading Rose to a section of the schoolhouse she hadn't visited recently, a small room that had been designated as storage space. When he opened the door, Rose gasped in surprise. The room had been transformed into a small but well-equipped apothecary, with shelves for herbs and medicines, a work table for preparations, and a comfortable chair for consultations. "Your own space to practice your healing arts," Brock explained, watching her reaction closely. "The ranch families need your skills, and this way you can combine both your callings, teaching and medicine." Tears welled in Rose's eyes as she took in the thoughtful gift. "It's perfect," she said, turning to embrace him and the baby he held. "Absolutely perfect." "There's one more thing," Brock said, his expression turning serious. "Something I've been wanting to ask you." He handed Rebecca to her carefully, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Opening it revealed a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. "Rose," he said, his voice husky with emotion, "we began our marriage as a practical arrangement, but it has become the greatest blessing of my life. I love you and Rebecca more than I ever thought possible. Would you do me the honor of renewing our vows, not out of necessity this time, but purely from love?" Rose felt her heart swell with joy as she looked at this man who had become her protector, her partner, and her true love. "Yes," she whispered, tears of happiness spilling down her cheeks. "1,000 times yes." As Brock slipped the ring onto her finger and sealed their agreement with a tender kiss, little Rebecca cooed happily between them, completing their family circle. 2 weeks later, they renewed their vows in a proper ceremony, attended by friends and neighbors from miles around. Judge Phillips officiated once again, his eyes twinkling with satisfaction as he pronounced them husband and wife, this time with no qualifications or pretense, just the simple truth of two people who had found love in the most unexpected circumstances. "I understand there was a time when someone tried to take you away from Brock," Judge Phillips said to Rose during the celebration that followed. "What happened?" Rose smiled, looking across the gathering to where Brock stood proudly holding Rebecca, surrounded by well-wishers. "They tried to take me away," she said simply, "but Brock said they'd have to go through him first." The judge nodded approvingly. "And how fortunate for all of you that they didn't succeed." "Yes," Rose agreed, her heart full as she watched her husband and daughter. "How very fortunate indeed." 5 years later, the Double R had expanded both in acreage and family members. Rebecca, now a lively 5-year-old with her mother's quick mind and her father's determined spirit, had been joined by 3-year-old Thomas Brock Ryder and infant twins Alina and Samuel. The schoolhouse had been enlarged to accommodate the growing number of children on the ranch and from neighboring properties, and Rose's apothecary practice had earned her a reputation throughout the territory. Judge Harmon's influence had crumbled following investigations into his corrupt dealings. He had fled the territory ahead of criminal charges, his whereabouts unknown. Sheriff Taylor, fully recovered from his wound, had been elected territorial representative, where he advocated for stronger protections for widows and orphans. On the anniversary of the day Brock had first come to Rose's rescue in Redemption Creek, the family gathered on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the valley in gold and crimson. "Tell us the story again, Papa," Rebecca pleaded, snuggling against Brock's side as Rose nursed the twins in the porch swing. "Which story is that, little one?" Brock asked, though he knew very well which tale his daughter requested most often. "About how you saved Mama when the bad men came," Rebecca said, her dark eyes serious. "And how you said they'd have to go through you first." Brock's gaze met Rose's over their children's heads, the love between them as strong and steady as the mountains that sheltered their valley. "Well," he began, his deep voice gentle in the evening air, "it was a day much like this one, when I rode into town and saw the most beautiful woman in the world being threatened by men who didn't understand her strength or her worth." As he recounted their story edited appropriately for young ears, Rose reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought them here. What had begun as desperate flight from danger had transformed into the deepest love and most profound partnership she could have imagined. Their beginning might have been unconventional, their early marriage a practical fiction, but the family they had built together was wonderfully, undeniably real. When Brock finished the tale with its now familiar happy ending, young Thomas clapped his hands in delight while Rebecca sighed contentedly. "And you lived happily ever after," she concluded with the certainty of a child who had never known anything but security and love. "Yes, my darling," Rose agreed, meeting Brock's warm gaze over their children's heads. "We certainly did."